activity on Mount Adams has spiked for the first time in about 4 decades. 6 quakes were recorded just last month. The strongest was magnitude 2.0.
It's totally at a state of background activity. So we're not worried about Mount Rainier right now.
Something strange is happening at Mount Adams in Washington. The volcano, usually quiet, has been shaking with 6 small earthquakes in just 1 month. No one saw this coming, and according to reports, it's even much worse than this. Scientists are now on edge, wondering if something bigger is coming. They're setting up new stations to keep a close eye on it. Could this be the start of an eruption? And what else is happening with the volcano? Join us as we look into the investigation of mysterious earthquake surge at Mount Adams. Investigation of the mysterious earthquakes. Scientists are trying to understand why Mount Adams, a volcano in Washington state, recently experienced a surprising increase in earthquakes. To investigate further, they have installed several temporary seismic monitoring stations at the site. Typically, Mount Adams only experiences 1 earthquake every 2 or 3 years, but in September, it recorded 6 small earthquakes in just 1 month. This is a noticeable jump in activity for this particular volcano, as shown by experts from the US Geological Survey and Cascades Volcano Observatory. The team of scientists is working to gather as much data as possible to figure out whether this recent increase is something unusual or just the volcano being more active than normal. They explained that volcanoes often talk through seismic activity. What is the volcano saying this time? What did these experts discover? Stay tuned, the most interesting part is still ahead. Mount St. Helens and Mount Rainier, which are also in the Cascades, typically have 10 to 20 earthquakes each month. Occasionally, these volcanoes experience bursts of increased seismic activity that can last for days or weeks, and this is considered part of their normal behavior. But for Mount Adams, this kind of activity stands out because it's not common for this volcano, even though it isn't unusual in the Cascades as a whole. Mount Adams is an impressive volcano, standing 12,277 feet high and stretching 18 miles wide. By volume, it is the largest active volcano in Washington state, even though Mount Rainier is taller. Despite its size, Mount Adams has not erupted in a very long time. Its last eruption happened roughly 4,000 years ago. Scientists say this long period of quiet does not necessarily mean an eruption is due anytime soon. Volcanoes, they explained, don't follow set schedules. Each one has its own personality. Some might erupt repeatedly over several decades or centuries, while others can stay dormant for thousands of years before showing any significant activity. The earthquakes recorded at Mount Adams recently have been very small, with magnitudes ranging from 0.9 to 2. Even if someone had been standing right near the volcano during one of these events, they likely wouldn't have felt anything. Scientists want to emphasize that this uptick in earthquakes does not mean an eruption is imminent. Instead, they are closely monitoring the situation to better understand what's happening beneath the surface. This careful observation will help them determine whether this increased activity is something to be concerned about or just part of the volcano's natural behavior. Mount Adams is known for its gentle eruptions, which typically involve slow-moving lava flows rather than the explosive, destructive type of eruption that people might fear. But the summit has a large section of weakened, unstable rock, which makes it potentially dangerous in a different way. If the volcano were to erupt, the biggest threat would likely come from lahars. These are fast-moving flows of mud, rock, ash, and ice that can race downhill like wet concrete, causing destruction along their path. When a volcano is getting ready to erupt, there are usually some clear signs. For instance, the ground around it might start to bulge or deform as magma pushes its way upward. Scientists can detect these changes using GPS and satellite technology. The volcano might also start releasing more gases, which can serve as another clue. Experts keep a close eye on these kinds of changes to determine if a volcano is gearing up for an eruption. Mount Adams only had 1 permanent seismic monitoring station, located about 7 miles southwest of its summit. That single station is doing an important job by keeping track of any unusual activity, but it's not enough on its own. There are plans to add more permanent monitoring stations next summer to improve the ability to track what's happening beneath the volcano. For now, Scientists say there isn't enough data to draw any firm conclusions about the recent earthquakes. The temporary stations they're installing will need time to gather more information before experts can understand what's really going on. Once the data has been collected and analyzed, scientists will be in a better position to figure out the causes of this unusual seismic activity and decide if they need to take further action. History of eruptions in Mount Adams. David Pyle, a volcanologist from the University of Oxford, shared his thoughts on the situation. He explained that small earthquakes like the ones at Mount Adams can happen for many reasons. Sometimes it's simply due to the rocks shifting and creaking under internal pressure. For a volcano like Mount Adams, which has been quiet for decades, this recent activity is unusual. Even so, there's no need to panic. It's too early to tell what's causing the earthquakes, but the monitoring system in place has done its job by detecting them. With the new monitoring stations and the tools scientists already have, they'll now be able to watch the volcano more closely and get a better understanding of what's happening underground. The new monitoring stations are part of a rapid response system designed to improve the ability to detect and analyze smaller earthquakes. Data from these new stations will be sent to CVO and the Pacific Northwest Seismic Network in real time, along with information from the existing permanent station. This will allow scientists to better pinpoint the size, location, and depth of future earthquakes. The temporary stations will play a key role in understanding whether this recent activity is linked to internal volcanic processes or something else entirely. Once enough data has been collected and analyzed, scientists will determine if additional actions or precautions are necessary. For now, the focus remains on gathering more precise information to gain deeper insights into this unusual pattern of seismic activity at Mount Adams. The question then is, have there been a disastrous eruption in Mount Adams before? You're at the edge of your seat, and it's about to get even better. Mount Adams is a volcano situated in south-central Washington. To help you visualize its location, it's about 50 miles west-southwest of Yakima, which is a well-known city in the state, and approximately 30 miles north of the White Salmon Hood River area. This area sits where Washington and Oregon meet along the Columbia River, a major and iconic landmark in the Pacific Northwest. What really makes Mount Adams stand out is that it isn't just an isolated volcano. It's part of a much larger volcanic system known as the Mount Adams King Mountain Volcanic Field. This field is quite expansive, featuring more than 120 smaller volcanoes scattered across multiple areas. These include parts of Skamania, Lewis, Klickitat, and Yakima counties, along with the western side of the Yakima Nation. That's a lot of volcanic features concentrated in one region, making it geologically rich and significant. In terms of size, Mount Adams is truly a giant. It holds the title of being the second tallest volcano in Washington state, a state that is home to several other well-known and sizable volcanoes. But what really sets Mount Adams apart is its overall scale. It's the largest active volcano in the state, not just in height, but also in terms of area and volume. Its sheer size and prominence make it one of the standout features of the landscape. Despite its massive presence, Mount Adams is not known for dramatic, violent eruptions like some other volcanoes. Its eruptions have typically been gentle and slow-moving, a style referred to as effusive eruptions. During these, lava flows out gradually instead of being expelled explosively. Because of this behavior, the volcano hasn't produced many ash clouds. In fact, the few ash layers it has created over the past 12,000 years have been relatively small and didn't spread very far from the source. When looking at its history, Mount Adams has experienced some eruptions, but they've been infrequent and not particularly large. Over the past 12,000 years, there have been 4 lava flows that originated from its slopes, as well as 2 eruptions that came from vents along its southern ridge. These lava flows didn't travel very far, usually only extending a few miles from where they began. This pattern of activity is in line with the volcano's overall character of being more subdued compared to some of the other active volcanoes in the region. As for its last eruption, that occurred thousands of years ago, somewhere between 3,800 and 7,600 years in the past. Since then, Mount Adams has been quiet, with no major activity reported in all that time. Possibilities of Mount Adams volcano eruption in future. The biggest risk near Mount Adams is lahars, fast-moving flows of mud, rock, ash, and ice that can happen even without an eruption. Landslides on the southwest side of the volcano caused large lahars about 6,300 years ago, reaching places like Trout Lake. Smaller avalanches have happened since, but they didn't travel far. The ice covering the summit hides weakened rock that could collapse in the future, triggering more lahars. So why is Mount Adams ranked as a high threat if there's no immediate eruption risk? The ranking is based on both the volcano's hazards and how they could affect nearby communities. The USGS assesses the volcano's past eruptions and the potential impact on people, aviation, and infrastructure. To reduce these risks, they're expanding the monitoring network as part of the National Volcano Early Warning System. Right now, there's no clear answer as to whether Mount Adams is gearing up for something more dramatic, or if the recent earthquakes are just part of its natural behavior. Volcanoes, including Mount Adams, often exhibit small-scale activity that doesn't necessarily lead to an eruption, but it's always important to stay cautious. Experts note that while Mount Adams is not known for explosive eruptions, the possibility of an eruption can't be entirely ruled out. If it were to happen, it would likely involve lava flows rather than a massive explosion, but predicting the exact nature or timing of any volcanic event is incredibly difficult. Volcanoes like Mount Adams could have been quiet for thousands of years. That doesn't guarantee continued dormancy. What influences a grand-scale eruption? Are there signs of this in Mount Adams? What you're about to hear will blow your mind. Eruptions are influenced by a variety of underground processes, such as the movement of magma and the release of volcanic gas. Rise toward the surface, it could create changes that scientists would carefully monitor, such as ground deformation or increased gas emissions. These are the kinds of signs experts look for to determine whether an eruption might be on the horizon. It's also worth noting that any future activity would depend heavily on the specific conditions inside the volcano. Changes in pressure, shifts in underground rock layers, or even the movement of magma beneath the surface could all play a role. Since Mount Adams is largely covered in ice, the presence of that ice could also interact with magma in ways that could influence the nature of an eruption. While there's no immediate indication that Mount Adams is heading toward an eruption, scientists are keeping a close watch to ensure that any potential changes are detected early. While adding more seismic stations around Mount Adams will help, it's just as important to upgrade the technology we're using. Right now, the systems can track earthquakes, but we need more advanced tools to detect subtle ground movements and other signs that current equipment might miss. Better technology means more accurate data, giving scientists a clearer picture of what's happening under the volcano. Another crucial piece in predicting eruptions is monitoring the gases released by the volcano. As magma rises, it lets out gases like sulfur dioxide and carbon dioxide, which can give early warning signs. Though Mount Adams doesn't have a gas sampling program yet, better equipment could help track these emissions more closely, giving scientists another tool to predict any future activity. The more we know, the better we can prepare. For millennia, the story of Adam and Eve has been etched in our minds. The forbidden fruit, the serpent's temptation, their expulsion from paradise. But what if there's more to the story? What if a hidden chapter, a lost book, has been waiting in the shadows, whispering a truth far more terrifying than we ever imagined? Scholars have spent years searching for this mythical text. Now, whispers are becoming shouts, as archaeologists claim to have unearthed the real deal. But what they've found isn't a comforting bedtime story. Join us as we dive into a story that will leave you questioning everything. The discovery. The books of Adam and Eve were discovered in the Egyptian tomb of Tutankhamen and subsequently published in 1926.
Now, it is one of the oldest books in existence, hails in fact from Egypt, right at the dawn of Christianity, and it's heading up for auction.
This book discusses the experiences of the well-known characters from Genesis following their expulsion from the Garden of Eden. The books of Adam and Eve demonstrate an underlying set of prehistoric beliefs, despite the dates and authenticity of their purported antiquity being disputed. The Apocalypse of Moses is the Greek title given to this book. Paul must have encountered it in some form because 2 Corinthians has some mentions of it. The original story was presented as a revelation to Moses, but the Latin version starts with an English translation. Although the exact date of the story's creation is unknown, scholars generally agree that it was written in the 1st century CE in a Semitic language, but it might have been told for a long time before being recorded in writing. Primary Latin textual sources date from the 9th, 10th, and 12th centuries. This work's history has not been well recorded because it was thought to be pseudepigraphical. A collection of historically accurate but fictitious biblical works is known as the pseudepigrapha. This book was left out of the Holy Bible compilation due to its stigma. Even though some people think it's pseudepigraphic, it offers important context and understanding of historical events. This book is merely an oral history passed down from generation to generation that connects the creation of the first human life to the moment someone made the decision to record it. Stay tuned. The story is just getting interesting. The Book of Adam and Eve. The Book of Adam and Eve is reportedly a written account of what happened after Adam and Eve were driven from the Garden of Eden. It is also known as the contradiction of Adam and Eve, or the conflict of Adam and Eve with Satan.
Satan told Adam and Eve that the fruit was actually good for them, but that God didn't want them to have it. Satan was trying to convince Adam and Eve that God could not be trusted.
The author of the Book of Adam and Eve is thought to have been an unidentified Egyptian who originally composed the narrative in Arabic. Eventually, the book traveled further south and was translated into Ethiopian. Although the exact composition date of the Book of Adam and Eve is unknown, many scholars think it was composed decades prior to the birth of Jesus. The book was first published in English in the 19th century. The Book of Adam and Eve consists of 2 books. Book Y chronicles Adam and Eve's flight from Eden and the temptations they faced from Satan afterward. The Book of Adam reveals that Cain and Abel had twin sisters. Cain killed his brother because he was in love with Luluwa, his twin, but his parents wanted him to wed Aklia, Abel's twin. The history of the patriarchs before the flood is told in Book 2. It also describes how the children of Seth dwelt on Mount Hermon, the holy mountain, until Jenan and the daughters of Cain persuaded them to descend from the mountain and, as fallen angels, to lose God's love for them. Next came the death of Cain, who was killed by Lamech the blind, and the lives of the other patriarchs up until Noah's birth. In Book 1, the punished serpent attempts to kill Adam and Eve, but is prevented by God, who again punishes the serpent by rendering it mute and casting it to India. Satan also attempts to deceive and kill Adam and Eve several times. In one of his attempts at their life, he throws a boulder, encompassing Adam and Eve. God eventually saves them and compares this event with the upcoming resurrection of Christ. God also predicts several future biblical events, including Noah and the flood. Great emphasis is placed in Book 1 on Adam's sorrow and helplessness in the world outside the garden. When God made Adam leave the garden, he did not place him on the northern border so that he wouldn't go near the water, so that he and Eve wouldn't wash themselves in it and be cleansed from their sins, forget the sin they had committed, and be no longer reminded of it in the thoughts of their punishment. Then, again, to the southern side of the garden, God was not pleased to let Adam dwell there, because if the wind blew from the north, it would bring Adam and Eve the delicious smell of the garden's trees. Therefore, God did not put Adam there so that he wouldn't smell the sweet smell of those trees, forget his sin, find consolation for what he had done, take delight in the smell of the trees, and not be cleansed from his sin. The plot thickens, so keep watching to find out what happened. Because God is merciful and of great pity and governs all things in a way he knows, he made Adam dwell on the western border of the garden, because on that side the earth is vast. And God commanded him to dwell there in a cave called the Cave of Treasures, which was below the garden. When Adam and Eve went out of the garden, they walked the grounds on their feet, not knowing they were treading. And when they got to the gate of the garden, and saw the broad earth spread before them, covered with stones large and small, and with sand they feared and trembled, and fell on their faces from the fear that came upon them, and they were as dead. Because they had been in the garden, beautifully planted with trees, they saw themselves in a strange land they knew nothing about and had never seen. God decided to take pity on them. When he saw them fall before the gate of the garden, he sent his word unto them and raised them from their fallen state. Adam and Eve wept after coming out of the garden, their first home. When Adam looked at his flesh, which was altered, he wept bitterly over what they had done. And they walked and went gently down into the cave of treasures. As they came to it, Adam wept over himself and said to Eve, "Look at this cave, our prison in this world, and a place of punishment. What is it compared with the garden? What is its narrowness compared with the space of the other? What is this rock by the side of those groves? What is this cavern's gloom compared with the garden's light? What is this overhanging ledge of rock to shelter us, compared with the mercy of the Lord that overshadowed us? What is the soil of this cave compared with the garden land? This earth, strewed with stones, and that, planted with delicious fruit trees?" Adam did not want to enter the cave under the overhanging rock, nor would he ever have entered it, but he bowed to God's orders and said that he would again be a transgressor unless he entered the cave. And on the morning of the 43rd day, they came out of the cave, sorrowful and weeping. Their bodies were lean and parched from hunger and thirst, fasting and praying, and their heavy sorrow because of their transgression. And when they came out of the cave, they went up the mountain west of the garden. There they stood, prayed, and sought God to grant them forgiveness for their sins. But then something unexpected happened. God looked upon Adam and his weeping and groaning, and the word of God came to him and said unto him, Adam, when thou wast in my garden, thou knewest neither eating nor drinking, neither faintness nor suffering, neither leanness of flesh nor change, neither did sleep depart from thine eyes. But since thou transgressed and camest into this strange land, all these trials have come upon thee. Then God commanded the cherub, who kept the garden gate with a sword of fire in his hand, to take some of the fig tree's fruit and give it to Adam. The cherub obeyed the command of the Lord God, went into the garden, and brought 2 figs on 2 twigs, each hanging to its leaf. The cherub took the 2 figs and brought them to Adam and Eve. But he threw them to them from afar, for they might not come near the cherub because their flesh could not come near the fire. At first, angels trembled at the presence of Adam and were afraid of him. But now Adam trembled before the angels and was afraid of them. Then Adam drew near and took 1 fig, and Eve came in turn and took the other. And as they took them up in their hands, they looked at them and knew they were from the trees they had hidden themselves. And Adam and Eve wept sore. Satan and 10 of his hosts transformed themselves into maidens for grace, unlike others. They came out of the river in the presence of Adam and Eve and said among themselves, Come, we will look at the faces of Adam and Eve, who are of the men upon earth. How beautiful they are, and how different they look from our faces. Then they approached Adam and Eve, greeted them, and stood wondering at them. Adam and Eve looked at them also, wondered at their beauty, and said, Is there, then, under us another world, with such beautiful creatures as these? Those maidens told Adam and Eve that they were abundant creations. Then Adam asked them how they multiplied. They answered that they have husbands who wedded them, and they bear their husbands' children, who grow up, and who in turn wed and are wedded, and also bear children. Thus they increase. Then they shouted over the river and called their husbands and their children, who came up from the river, and everyone went to their wife with their children. But when Adam and Eve saw them, they stood dumb and wondered at them. Then they said to Adam and Eve, See our husbands and children. Wed Eve as we wed our wives, and you shall have children the same. This was a device of Satan to deceive Adam. Satan thought within himself, God first commanded Adam concerning the fruit of the tree, saying to him, Eat not of it, else of death thou shalt die. But Adam ate it, and yet God did not kill him. He only decreed upon his death, and plagues and trials, until the day he shall come out of his body. So now, if he deceives him to do this thing, and to wed Eve without God's commandment, God will kill him then. Meanwhile, the fire of sin came upon Adam, who thought of sinning. But he restrained himself, fearing that if he followed the advice of Satan, God would put him to death. Then Adam and Eve arose and prayed to God, while Satan and his hosts descended into the river. Then Adam and Eve went back to the cave of treasures. They both arose and prayed to God that night. Adam remained standing in prayer, yet did not know how to pray due to the thoughts of his heart regarding his wedding to Eve, and he continued so until morning. God approved Adam concerning his thoughts and the prayer he had offered in his presence. The word of God came unto Adam, and he said to him, O Adam, if only thou hadst had this caution at first, ere thou camest out of the garden into this land. After that, God sent his angel who had brought gold, the angel who had brought incense, and the angel who had brought myrrh to Adam, so they should infer that he was respecting his wedding, Eve. Then those angels told Adam to take the gold and give it to Eve as a wedding gift, and betroth her. Then give her some incense and myrrh as a present, and be ye, thou and she, one flesh. Adam listened to the angels, took the gold, put it into Eve's bosom in her garment, and betrothed her with his hand. Then the angels commanded Adam and Eve to arise and pray 40 days and 40 nights, and after that Adam should come into his wife, for then this would be a pure and undefiled act, and he would have children who would multiply and replenish the face of the earth. Both Adam and Eve received the words of the angels, and the angels departed from them. Adam and Eve began to fast and pray until the end of the 40 days, and then they came together, as the angels had told them. When Adam left the garden until he wedded Eve, it was 223 days, 7 months, and 13 days. Thus, Satan's war with Adam was defeated, but that's not all. When the time came that she should bring forth, she suffered. Adam was so sorry, and his heart suffered for her sake, for she was near death. He rose and prayed to God and said, O Lord, look upon me with the eye of thy mercy, and bring her out of her distress. And God looked at his maid-servant Eve and delivered her, and she brought forth her firstborn son, and with him a daughter.
And the days of Adam after he had begotten Seth were 800 years. And he begat sons and daughters.
Then Adam rejoiced at Eve's deliverance, and over the children she had borne him. Adam ministered unto Eve in the cave until the end of 8 days, when they named the son Cain and the daughter Luluwa. The meaning of Cain is hater, because he hated his sister in their mother's womb. But Luluwa means beautiful, because she is more beautiful than her mother. Then Adam and Eve waited until Cain and his sister were 40 days old, and Adam said unto Eve, We will make an offering, and offer it up on behalf of the children. And Eve said, We will make one offering for the firstborn son, and afterward we shall make one for the daughter, when the days of nursing the children were ended. Eve again conceived, and when her days were accomplished, she brought forth another son and daughter, and they named the son Abel, and the daughter Aclemia. Then, at the end of 40 days, Adam made an offering for the son, and at the end of 80 days, he made another offering for the daughter, and did by them, as he had done before by Cain and his sister Luluwa. The children began to wax stronger and grow in stature, but Cain was hard-hearted and ruled over his younger brother. Meanwhile, Abel had a meek heart and was obedient to his father and mother. In Book 2, the sons of God who appear in Genesis 6:2 are identified as the children of Seth, and the daughters of men as women descended from Cain, who successfully tempt most of the Sethites to come down from their mountain and join the Cainites in the valley below, under the instigation of Genun, son of Lamech. This Genun invents musical instruments, generally attributed to Jubal. However, he also invents weapons of war, generally attributed to Tubal-Cain. The Cainites descended from Cain, the first murderer.
Cain talked with Abel his brother, and it came to pass when they were in the field that Cain rose up against Abel his brother and slew him.
Are described as exceedingly wicked and prone to commit murder and incest. After seducing the Sethites, their offspring become the Nephilim, the mighty men of Genesis 6, who are all destroyed in the deluge, as detailed in other works such as Enoch and Jubilees. The next part of this video will change everything you've been thinking about. The difference between the book of Genesis and the book of Adam and Eve. The stories of creation have captivated humanity for millennia, offering explanations for our existence and the world around us. Within the Judeo-Christian tradition, two primary narratives stand out: the book of Genesis and the book of Adam and Eve. While both share the core concept of a divine creator and humanity's place in creation, they diverge significantly, revealing contrasting perspectives on God, humanity, and the nature of good and evil. The book of Genesis, the first book of the Hebrew Bible and Christian Old Testament, is traditionally attributed to Moses. However, modern scholarship suggests more complex authorship, likely compiled from various oral traditions over a long period. Genesis is central in Judaism and Christianity. It is considered divinely inspired and foundational to their respective faiths. However, the book of Adam and Eve is not part of the Hebrew Bible or Christian canon. It is considered an extra-canonical text, meaning it was excluded from the official collection of Scripture. There are multiple versions of the book of Adam and Eve, with varying origins and content. Some scholars believe it originated around the 1st century AD, while others posit earlier. Although not considered canonical, the Book of Adam and Eve has influenced various Christian traditions and interpretations of the creation story. The two narratives' most striking difference is their depiction of creation. Genesis offers two creation accounts in its opening chapters. The first, in Genesis 1, portrays a majestic and orderly process. God speaks creation into existence, separating light from darkness, land from water, and creating the heavens and earth over 6 days. Both male and female, humanity is created in God's image on the 6th day, signifying humanity's unique place within creation. The second account, in Genesis 2, provides a more detailed picture of humanity's creation. Here, God forms Adam from the dust of the ground and places him in the Garden of Eden, a lush paradise filled with plants and animals. God then fashions Eve from Adam's rib, creating a companion and helper for him. This narrative emphasizes a more intimate and hands-on approach to creation, focusing on humanity's connection to the natural world. Meanwhile, the Book of Adam and Eve elaborates further on Adam's creation, depicting God breathing life into a formless clay figure. It also expands on the creation of Eden, describing it as a pre-existing paradise with all its wonders already present. Both narratives present humanity as a unique creation. In Genesis, humanity is created in the image of God, signifying a unique capacity for reason, morality, and relationship with God. However, there is no mention of specific roles for men and women. The Book of Adam and Eve assigns distinct roles to men and women. Adam is depicted as strong and active, tasked with tending the garden. On the other hand, Eve is portrayed as more passive and curious. This emphasis on differing roles has influenced interpretations of gender dynamics and hierarchy within some Christian traditions. However, the concept of the fall, humanity's disobedience to God, is present in both narratives. In Genesis, the serpent tempts Eve to eat from the forbidden tree of knowledge of good and evil. Eve then shares the fruit with Adam, expelling them from Eden. The serpent is not explicitly identified as Satan in Genesis, but the narrative suggests a consequence. Humans lose their innocence and immortality and are burdened with mortality, toil, and hardship. The Book of Adam and Eve paints a more elaborate picture of the fall. Here, the serpent directly addresses Eve, appealing to her desire for knowledge and equality with God. The narrative emphasizes Eve's role in the transgression, portraying her as the first to succumb to temptation. Additionally, it introduces the concept of shame and the need for clothing. Ultimately, both narratives serve as cautionary tales about the consequences of disobedience and the complexities of human nature. Do you think volcanic activity is imminent? Or is this just a minor occurrence? Let us know in the comments section below. If you enjoyed the video, Make sure you like, share, and subscribe. Also, click the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.